To those who are watching from YouTube, welcome. And to those who are listening on other platforms, particularly Clubhouse, if you can hear me, welcome. Today's session and today's topic is one that I have chosen. In many ways, it could be considered to be provocative, but it was inspired nonetheless from a social interaction that I had yesterday, which I thought would be a useful way of, I guess, bringing to the table what I think could be a way of dealing with some of the issues that we face in society today. I titled today's session the A, B, C, and D of the image, and why blacks are not winning as they should. Let me start by perhaps expanding or explaining what the ABC stands for. I chose the ABC because one of the easy ways to identify and understand concepts is by making them as simple as possible. When we talk about image, we all have an image. We have a self-image, an internal self-image, but we also have an external self-image. Your external self-image is what you see when you stand in front of the mirror, but also what the world sees when they look at you. We also have, and in this regard, what I call an ethnic image. This is what people see, the inferences they make, the conclusions they draw regarding what they see. In many ways, your ethnic image is like a bank account. On a daily basis, your actions are like deposits into a centralized bank account belonging to everyone who has that image or that ethnic image. Those who are outside of that particular ethnic image make withdrawals. Their withdrawals are made in the form of inferences, stereotypes, conclusions, observations. Sometimes they prejudge. In any case, over time, depending on the amount of deposits that are in the bank account, the inferences and the conclusions will come to what I call an equilibrium between both, meaning people are drawing conclusions based on what the bank account says. So when we talk about, and when I talk about the ABC of image, the A stands for your appearance. The way you dress, the way you put yourself together, whether by your attire, the clothes you're wearing, the accessories you have on you, the ornaments you wear. It also goes as far as whatever form of enhancements that you have done to yourself, whether that be tattoos, permanent or artificial. But your appearance is a combination of your visual image. The B refers to your behavior, how you conduct yourself, especially in a social setting, decorum, mannerisms, etiquette, your actions. The C stands for your communication, how you speak, the words you use, your enunciations of those words, it also includes your body language, which roughly about 87% of all communication is by form of body language. So in a social setting, you're communicating by body language, predominantly. The words you use, the pitch of your voice, all add up to make another 15%. So ABC is really the core part of your image. People make a conclusion on who you are based on what they see, your actions, and how you communicate to them. D is something that has come into the picture lately over the last decade, because we have social media. And so we have what we call your digital footprint, your digital image. Most of the time, people, if they know they are supposed to meet you, or even after they have met you, it's not unusual for people to go online and search to find out who you are. And what they see digitally gives them a picture of who you might be. Now we can go into E, F, G, and the list continues. E refers to education and how you perhaps present yourself based on the amount of knowledge you have. In any case, I thought about today's session because I was in a social gathering yesterday, and I thought the conversation was fascinating, but I thought perhaps I should share some of what was discussed in that social setting, in this forum and in this group. But to paint the picture, it was quite rich. And by richness, I'm not talking about monetary value. I'm talking about the fact that we had 4 or 5 different generations of people together having a conversation. Someone from the silent generation. We had someone who was from the baby boomers generation, Generation X, Generation Y or millennials, and Generation Z. And it was fascinating to see each person or each group, each person from the particular generation express their views about the same topic. One of the things I will talk about, and one of the things we did talk about, is the national discussion over the past week. A number of referencing the event that took place at Buckingham Palace between a royal aide and a black woman. As you can imagine, in this particular occasion, yesterday, people were looking to me to express what I thought about the national conversation and my opinions. And I thought perhaps I would extract some of those moments and present it to a wider audience. Black people in the West, and I should make it very clear that I'm speaking to black people in the West and those who share my ethnic image. I've come to the conclusion, and this has not been something done in a short period of time, but over a few decades, I've come to the conclusion that we are too distracted by trivial issues and events, and those trivial issues are stopping us from achieving our maximum potential, developing into the best versions of who we could be. But more importantly, those trivial issues have given us an image that says that we are victims. And I do not say this very lightly. I say this in many ways from a sad place. We have taken, and this is the stereotype, it's not necessarily applicable to every person. I'm speaking in general terms. I'm generalizing. The perception amongst those who are not blacks, but particularly those who are whites, in the UK specifically, amongst certain demographics or generations of people, is the black people are those who we have to speak to very, very cautiously and very softly to avoid the risk of offending them. The idea is that if they are not careful, that we would see ourselves as victims, which is very, very sad and tragic. In any case, my observation has been that over the past decade, 2 decades, if you want to go that far, we've moved from what I call the reals society to the feels society. People are a lot more concerned about how they feel rather than what they think. In many ways, I should start by saying that one of my principles is that in interactions on a social setting or with other people, you have to come, and I always try to come to the table applying what I call the good faith principle, or the principle of peace, or the principle of good intentions. In other words, I come into the interaction in good faith, I come into the interaction peaceably, and I come into the interaction believing that I want something mutually beneficial to all parties. Now, what that does for me is it creates an aura, an ambience of forgiveness, recognizing that the way we think, and in many ways the conversation I'm having now, I'm thinking in real time. Some of my thoughts are not fully formulated, and therefore I risk offending you or offending the next person by something I say. The question, however, has to do with intentions. If I had pre-thought through, or this is a premeditated activity with the intention of causing offense, then that is not in good faith. Now, this brings me to the point, which is that classically in Britain, we were known to be gentlemen and gentlewomen. We could disagree on many things, but we could be respectful. There was a time when offense had to be given, the offense had to be received, and then it had to be accepted. Now, 3 important steps. If I come to the table, and if you come to the table in good faith, and someone else comes with ulterior motives, and they give offense to both of us, we receive the offense. But if we reject and do not accept the offense, then in many ways, we do not walk away feeling as though we are victims. And this is where I see a lack of understanding, and partly why black people are not winning as much as they should, especially in interactions between different ethnic groups. The assumption is always that the white person is coming to the interaction in bad faith, which I think is really sad, but also very, very wrong. We've moved away from a period when we felt that we had the opportunity, recognizing that there were obstacles in the way, but we had the opportunity nonetheless, and we were playing a game of odds. Irrespective of the opportunities and the obstacles, we felt we could stay focused, stay in what we call, or what is called, the zone of proximal development, the zone, meaning that you stayed focused on the target and the outcomes, and you did not concern yourself so much with all of the challenges and all of the irritations that could derail you from achieving your goal. You stayed professional. You stayed within the frame of focus. Now that has changed over the past 10 to 15 years, especially with social media. It's not too uncommon these days that people broadcast errors of omission and errors of commission that were perpetrated by other people towards them, completely forgetting what the mission and what the outcome should be, and they get distracted. In my conversation with the group yesterday, and this is where I start today's conversation, I was asked, and I being the black person in this particular small group, I was asked what I thought about the events that took place over the past week. I generally prefer not to go into issues with race and ethnicity and social issues. In any case, I thought it was useful to share my position. I could see how the conversation was framed and put across to me, very, very gently, very tactfully, as though they were afraid of making me feel like a victim, but also afraid of causing any upset. And so I thought perhaps I would use the conversation as a teaching lesson, with the hope that I can invite people who disagree with me on whatever grounds, but disagree respectfully. My intention, however, was to plug in the ABC of self-image into the picture so we all can see how our image, particularly our ethnic image, plays a part in how the world perceives and reacts to us. Now let me start with the Buckingham Palace conversation. As far as I know, the question was asked, where are you from? And I did 2 days ago or so, I did a session, I had a conversation about this. The question, where are you from, is a question that I have been asked thousands of times in different countries by different people, using different languages, both by people who share my ethnic image, in this case blacks, and those who do not share my ethnic image, in this case non-blacks. Despite being asked more than a few thousand times, I have never found the word offensive. Now, I might be different from everyone else, but let me explain the reason why I haven't found it offensive. And this is perhaps at the core of some of the social disagreements that we have and that I see in the West, particularly amongst ethnic groups. There is a huge misunderstanding of a number of words. We conflate certain words as being synonymous. One of the words is ethnicity. Another word is your heritage, your ancestry, your nationality or citizenship, or even your lineage. Now, culture and race are usually sometimes thrown into the mix, very poorly. And because we conflate all of those words, because we do not understand the definition of all of those words, and because we're not sensitive and we do not have enough grace on the table in interacting with people who are different from us, we take offense too soon when offense has not been given. Now, this interaction in Buckingham Palace was a classical example, and let me take you through the ABC and the steps taken. The lady in question, I understand, has chosen to go by the name of Ngozi Fulani. But I also understand that she has a different name. She's Caribbean, and she has a Caribbean name and father. Medley is the name that comes to mind, Mrs. Her name was changed, formally or informally, but she chose to go by a different name. So in my conversation with the group yesterday, I said that the first time I heard of the event or the encounter, the first question I asked myself was, where is she from? And the reasons for my question. Now, here are the reasons. The first name, Ngozi, is an African name from Nigeria, from the Igbo tribe. Igbos generally use the word Ngozi as a way of explaining something that is a blessing or something that is a gift. That's what the word means. Amongst about 2 or 3 of the 5 Igbo states, some use that name or that word as a first name. When I saw her name first, I said, okay, she has an Igbo name, but her last name is Fulani. Fulani is a tribe in West Africa, the Sahel region and the West African region, but particularly in the northern parts of Nigeria, we have what we call the Hausa Fulani tribe. The Fulanis spread across that sub-Saharan area with concentrations in Nigeria, but going as far as Chad, Guinea, and a few other countries in West Africa. So what came to mind was, well, the last name is the name of a tribe. And generally speaking, Nigerians do not use a tribal name as a last name or a first name. Now, there are a number of tribes in Nigeria, and I will come into talking about Africa soon. We have the Yoruba, we have the Igbos, we have the Hausas and Fulanis as the major tribes. Yeah, there are others, but when you look at the rounding error of 0, most of the other tribes fall within the rounding error of 0. The major tribes are the ones I've described. The Hausa Fulani tribe, who are the largest and have the most population, the Igbos and the Yorubas. So my first impression was, we go back to the ABC. Where is she from? Because her first name is Igbo, her last name would never be used by someone who is a native in the country without being from that tribe. So I was confused. Now, her appearance was what made me even more confused. Your appearance matters. People see you first before they hear you speak. The interaction between the lady in question and the royal aide indicated that from an image perspective, that what she was putting across, that there wasn't congruency in the ABC of her image or of her ethnic image. She was not dressed in any of the local Nigerian attires. So appearance-wise, if I had seen her and never heard of her name, I would have asked the same question, where are you from? Where is she from? The key point is appearance, the B representing behavior, and the C representing communication. I communicated to the group yesterday that from what I had heard and seen, the conversation was recorded. Now that indicates that she came, I guess, to the interaction and it wasn't in good faith. You usually record a conversation for a number of reasons, for training, monitoring purposes, if you are a business, or when you feel that you are dealing with bad players and that you need some evidence to protect you. Now, Buckingham Palace, generally speaking, is not a place where people would feel unsafe, and it's not a place known to treat people in a bad way or to make them feel unwelcome. So that indicated to me that for some reason she had ulterior motives before she came to the interaction. Now it gets really fascinating now, because if you listen to the conversation between both people, you can see that it brings to the surface something that we struggle with in the UK, which is when we conflate nationality with ethnicity or heritage or lineage, and sometimes citizenship. In any case, let me put this lady aside and let me see if I can delve a little bit deeper into the ethnicity, heritage, nationality issue, just a little bit deeper. And I think this might be of help to both people who disagree with me or agree with me. Let me start with Africa, perhaps as a way of creating a bigger picture. Most people, myself included, our understanding of the world and how we got to understand the various continents started from our introduction to what was called the world map. Depending on where you were raised or born or grew up, you may have come across what's called the Metacore or Mercator map. It's a map which distinguished scholars have said is distorted. Distorted in the perspective that its linear scale increases with this latitude. So, to put it in more simple terms, the map distorts the size in geographical terms of any object that is far from the equator. And as a result of that, it conveys that distortion or that distorted perception to the person using it in relation to the geometry of the overall planet or the continent. Now let me put it in more simple terms. Most people, when they hear of Africa, and this is an error of omission and commission, and certainly not done with intention. When people hear of Africa, and this is where the confusion lies, the observation of people who have not been in Africa or been to Africa is that Africa is a small country. There are many people who think Africa is a country. And those who believe it to be a continent believe it to be a small continent, which is wrong. That error, in many ways, is as a result of the maps that we use in society today. The Mercator map is hugely distorted. Now, to put a picture so you can understand why Africa is not as it's portrayed to the world. If you were to take the whole of Africa as a geographical landmass, and you took the United States, and you took all of China, and you took all of Japan, and you took all of Eastern Europe, if you took all of Portugal, Spain, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, and Italy, and you included the entire British Isles, you could fit all those countries in Africa, and you would still have more land mass. That is how huge Africa is. Now, in Africa, we have 54 countries. We have about 3,000 tribes and sub-tribes. We have about 2,500 languages or dialects. The point I'm trying to make is Africa is very diverse. Now, I used the example in my interaction yesterday that if you were to select 4 people from Western Africa randomly across all the various countries in Western Africa, 4 from the northern part of Africa, another 4 from the eastern part of Africa, 4 from the central part of Africa, and finally 4 from the southern part of Africa, and you had 20 people, and you lined all of them by sight next to each other, and you asked someone who was not of African descent or from the Caribbean. In other words, someone who had a different ethnic image, to observe the 20 people, the conclusion would be that the 20 people are and have the same ethnic image and are of the same race. Nothing can be further, and that cannot be further from the truth. We are so different within countries and across countries. Now, I'm using this as an explanation to make a point, and I'll connect it back to the Buckingham Palace interaction. In Africa, what we have is lines that were drawn, people of different tribes that were pulled together, and in some locations, people who despise and hate each other, coexisting and cohabiting within a geographical area. They have different languages, different values, different morals, different religions, different lifestyles, different goals and dreams, and therefore unique within their own groups. Africa is very tribal, historically. It's also very tribal within each country. Now let me start by using the country with the largest population, Nigeria. Now I use Nigeria for two reasons. It has the largest population, but also the interaction in Buckingham Palace by the woman was between two parties. One who, in terms of her ABC of image, was portraying to the world that she is of African, but more importantly Nigerian heritage. In Nigeria, we have there are several ethnic groups. The three major ones, you can extend it to four. I said before, the Hausa, Fulani, Igbos, and Yorubas. Now, there are so many others, but this is smaller in representation of percentages. But within, and let me use the Igbo tribe, for example, there are so many sub-tribes that are unique in how they perceive themselves, although under the same Igbo umbrella, consider themselves to be independent and different. Now, the point of all of this is to say that one of the things that is consistent across Africa is that the way people communicate to the world of what makes them unique or different is using the ABC of their self-image, their appearance, their behavior, and their communication. The lady in question at the Buckingham Palace event dressed in such a way to an event, and now let me expand this perhaps slightly. For those who live in Great Britain or the UK, Buckingham Palace is the quintessential institution representing the Anglo-Saxon heritage, history, both past, but also represent the present. An event at Buckingham Palace means that you've been invited in good faith, but you've been invited because you're considered at whatever level to be important, and that your voice and your presence is worthy of note. People who attend such events, if this was an event that was British, you would find across the four nations of the United Kingdom, you would find that there will be a consistency in attires. People would dress in a similar fashion. Perhaps the exception would be the Scots, where you might see people wear kilts. In any case, the general people, or in general, there will be a consistency in how people dress. Someone from Africa who wears a local African attire of a particular tribe is communicating to the world. If you dress using part of your heritage or that inheritance you have of culture, and you put it in your appearance, you're doing that for two reasons. One is to say to the world, I am different. but I am proud of where I'm from. But you're also using it as a way of signaling to those who could be at that event, but you're not aware of. It's a signaling thing. Sometimes we use it to celebrate, or we use it to signal, or we use it to just communicate. By attending the event dressed as though she was in Africa, she was communicating her difference. And that said difference naturally will draw on questions. Being asked, where are you from, should not have been seen as a racist question. I have found that more damage is being done by people who are profiting from stoking racial divisions between and amongst the country without reason. Now, I believe in calling out things that are wrong when they present themselves. But in this particular case, this was a good example of something being wrong or rotten in Denmark. I could see from a distance that this wasn't a racial issue, perhaps the mannerism. And this brings me back to my interaction with the group yesterday. There was a chap there who was from the silent generation. He was in his 80s. The way he communicated to all of us was very, very unique and very different. These are people who fought in the Second World War, or who were born into the Second World War and therefore saw life in a very different way. They're usually very direct. They're usually very honest, and generally speaking, they have a dark or cold sense of humor, but they come in good faith, mostly, because they have seen so much suffering over time. These are the people who died on the beaches of Normandy. So their resolve is not to be questioned. If they want to offend you, they tell it to your face. They don't use words. They don't hide behind words. But they're generally very kind. And it was fascinating to see the old gentleman express his views about his experiences working in the coal mine 60, 50 years ago. And how things have changed. But what I found really fascinating was there was a lady who was someone else who was in a baby boom generation. And perhaps I'm going to do a session on why a lot of the social decays we have in the West, I believe the baby boomer generation have a lot to answer for. Firstly, I think these are the generations that saw their parents suffer, despised the suffering of their parents, rejected all the traditions of their ancestors, speaking specifically in the UK, rejected both the bad and the good. In other words, throwing out the baby with the bath water. Have no concept of the inheritance such as the Judeo-Christian values, the Enlightenment, Western civilization. I'm more interested in holding on to the liberal principles and liberal ideals, believing that everything English, British, is evil. And it was fascinating to see the guy who was from the silent generation and the people who were the baby boomers express their views. Now this brings me into Generation X and then Generation Y and the people there. In any case, it was a rich conversation because you could see people express their positions, and those who were in the millennial generation or Generation Y are the ones who have seen, who have been raised in the internet age, in social media era, and who have been so used to change on an exponential basis. And what I took out from the conversation was how important it is to just show some grace towards each other. recognizing that those who are much older were born in a different time, were raised under different conditions. In many ways, were set in their ways and how they think, and not very much into the internet age and social media. Some of them still live the way they did 40 years ago. Are not aware of some of the societal, changes on a social level. And therefore, when you listen to them speak, you could, if you're not gracious, and if you haven't come in good faith, you might perceive their approach to be unacceptable because you're judging them in the lens or using the lens of the present. Similarly, if you looked at those who were or are in the millennial generation, my observation was you could see the silent generation and the look in some of their eyes, a feeling of sadness from the position that they felt all of the sacrifices they made are being trivialized, all for a feels versus real society. It's all about feeling. Nothing is about reality. And so I concluded the conversation with them on the basis that from a social perspective, and here is where I will start to take to task people who share my ethnic image. And I do so recognizing, or for you to recognize it's coming from a good place, but I can critique you, because if I don't, who else will? It's almost as though those who are blacks in the UK or the West do not want to be critiqued or criticized. They do not want to be corrected. They don't want to be chastised, but they want to be treated as equals. You want equality of outcomes rather than equality of opportunity. You refuse to play the hand that has been dealt with grace, with dignity. We're focused on trivial issues that do not add, with the exception of those who are profiting from stoking division, but do not add to our progress. And in many ways, rather than moving forward, we're creating an environment where, think about it like playing a game. Let me use the example of martial arts. I was involved in martial arts for many, many, many years. Competed at every level, national, European, world level, representing England. My progress and my development in martial arts did not come from the quantity of time invested in the art. The most progress I made came when I was placed on the tatami or in the dojo or in a competition with people who were better than myself. And I was forced to strive towards being better through osmosis, but also being, you might say, having my ass kicked. Going back to the drawing board and trying to learn and understand why the other people were better than I was, or why the other people performed better than I did. In other words, the principle of iron sharpening iron was why and how I got better over time. I found that I had to move between associations and clubs, training partners and sparring partners, until I found myself amongst people who were competing with excellence as their motto. In some areas I found I trained with people who just wanted to train because it was a good way of exercising. And for that reason I stagnated. When I moved to spar with people, train with people, even be coached by the best, my performance started to improve. In other words, the hurdles was what made me stronger, better, and faster. Think about this as though you're running a race. You can run a 200-meter race, and there are no obstacles. You have a start and a stop position. A hurdle race is different. You have obstacles, and as you run and you approach the obstacles, you have to know and understand timing, placement. You have to know how to jump, when to jump, how to land, when to land, how to pace yourself between hurdles, but also how to ensure that you do not knock down the hurdles according to the rules of the race. In other words, you have to multitask. It's not just about speed. You have to learn how to jump and then how to run fast. Now, that means that the training required to be an exceptional, say, 400-meter hurdle runner is more strenuous than someone who is just running a 200-meter race. The obstacle is the way, and this is the point I want to make to Black people. The obstacle is the way. In the West, we are complaining too often, too much, and without reason. We are asking for obstacles to be removed from our way so that we can run the race like other people. Well, I would not want to be in a world where there are no obstacles, because the way I develop tenacity, the way I make sacrifices, hard work, in many ways, if you look at the keys to success and you pick out 2 or 3 keys, you're looking at being conscientious as an individual and being intelligent and being dutiful. Those 3 benchmarks will do more to ensure you succeed than anything else. Those 3 specific attributes require time, discipline, sacrifice. I have found that the harder I work, the luckier I get. Now, I do not always get lucky, and so I've had to learn how to replace the concept of playing a game of luck, and I migrated to playing a game of chance, and today I play a game of odds. It's all about odds. In any case, you need to be able to play all 3 games. Black people in the UK, particularly in the West, need to stop apologizing or need to stop feeling as though they have something to answer for, and just do you. Think about it like a game of poker. You're dealt a few cards. Don't worry about the cards your opponent has. Don't worry about the pace at which it was served to him. Just play the cards that you've been dealt and play to your best. Now, to do that, you will need to understand the importance of your self-image, your self-identity, your self-concept, and your self-worth. The reason we have the word self before any of the other words as an adjective is because it all comes from self. We are trying too hard. And in many ways I can see, and in the conversation yesterday, I rebuked a few white people who were there because they were trying to make me feel like victims or make me feel as though I was a victim. And I said, no, listen, I don't believe in luck. I believe I get up every single day and I have the opportunity to make my life what I think it should be. I will not succeed in that process always, but I can try. What I do not want is someone on one side of my ear telling me every day that the reason I'm not succeeding is because there is another white person on the other side who has placed obstacles to stop me from getting from point A to point B. I care very little about such positions. As long as I'm moving progressively between point A and point B, for me, that is success. It's the journey. It's the person I'm becoming whilst in pursuit of that goal. So as a people, we have to be aware of not becoming known for our tendency to see ourselves as victims. Now, part of the reason I went through the time to explain how the whole African continent is set up and why each and every country is different, is to say the following. And this is where perhaps I might have some pushback, I might have some disagreements. There is ignorance on both sides of the divide. We as Africans, and I use that from the position of our place of origin, whether you are Caribbean or from Africa or born to the West. There is ignorance on both sides. Many of us have not been, and we're not empowered with a sense of self, a sense of identity, a sense of our heritage, our roots, our ancestry, and more importantly, our history, good, bad, or indifferent. And so there is a feeling as though we are not adequate to other people from other races. Now, I was raised to think and to believe that I am not superior to any other person, but also that I am not inferior to any other person. The spirit within is the same. The potential exists. It's what you make of yourself and whether you work harder during pre-season before everyone else is ready to play. There is ignorance on both sides where those who share my ethnic image are not aware of the power of their ethnic image, and therefore the ABCD on a daily basis is being misused. If you pay attention to your appearance on a daily basis, and you pay attention to your behavior on a daily basis, and you're careful about your communication on a daily basis, if you ensure that from a digital perspective, you present yourself to the world recognizing that the data will remain forever, and therefore you choose what you put out, what you will find is that you are depositing into a bank account. Your role is to make that deposit and not to be concerned with the withdrawals by other people in forming an opinion of you. Now, this might be a useful opportunity for me to bring in other ethnic groups, and I do so recognizing my lack of knowledge of other ethnic groups. It's fascinating that when you look at the Orientals, in this case, the South Koreans and the Chinese, in any part of the West, there is a perception of that ethnic image. We may not be able to distinguish between the sub-ethnicities of people from the Orientals, but what we do say is that the stereotype, the inferences we draw, which we draw from the bank account that they have deposited as part of their self-image, is one that we can emulate, irrespective of your ethnicity. From an education point of view, from a knowledge basis point of view, from a social behavioral point of view, from an ABC of self-image point of view. In the West, we do not hear or see those who are Oriental in a lot of antisocial behavior. So when we hear that there has been an altercation somewhere, the last picture we have in our minds is a Chinese man chasing someone down with a knife. It just doesn't happen that often. Why? Because over the same thing, to ensure that the inferences that are drawn by other people about our group is a positive one. rather than a negative one. If I move into those from the India subcontinent, and obviously I would include recognizing respectfully that India is a country to itself, but if you include those from the neighboring parts of India, there is an image that they put across as well. Industrious, hardworking, intelligent, kind, polite, peaceful. They do not get involved in antisocial behaviors. Again, that is the ABC and D of their self-image, which they deposit in a bank account. We who are not part of that ethnicity, we withdraw in forming opinions, good, bad, or indifferent. So, I guess in a way of concluding, I would say every day we all have to stand guard and ensure that what we are putting out to the world with regards to our ethnic image, using the ABCD steps, is something that we are proud of. It just has to be that way. Otherwise, nothing will change. Your responsibility as a black person, especially as a black person in the West, is to have self-assurance. But that comes from having a good self-identity or self-image. It comes from knowledge of self and your history and your lineage. But also comes down to good communication, knowing how to educate people peacefully, how to engage with text wrongly, and to come to the table always, I would always say, in good faith. And if even when the other person across the table is given offense, always keep in mind that the offense has to be received first, and then it has to be accepted. You don't have to accept the offense. And most of the time, if you're straightforward in your communication, and you do so peacefully, it's not unusual that people come in ignorance, but leave you as a result of a positive interaction with you, being enlightened, because you've responded to them with grace, with kindness, and with forgiveness. But to be able to do that, you have to understand self, you have to understand your, in many ways, where you're from. You have to understand your people. You have to try not to be distracted by trivial issues. Keep your eye on the prize. And on the other side of the position, and I talked about ignorance on both sides, and I say this to some of my friends who are in the West and who are black, and this is a controversial position, but I say to them that you have to remember that you are on the land of the Anglo-Saxons. You know, the history of this country goes back to the Germanic tribes. Before that, the Romans, the Saxons, the Vikings. This is the land of the Anglo-Saxons. And maybe in 100 years, through natural selection, things will change. But at present, you have to recognize that even if the other party is ignorant of your culture, and even if they're clumsy in their communication with you to understand your culture, you should judge them on 3 foundations. 1, curiosity, fascination, and good faith. So things will be said poorly, but rather than be frustrated by questions, why don't you choose the posture of being fascinated by their questions? I didn't dwell today on the connection between heritage, ethnicity, nationality, lineage, and ancestry. That might be for another session. But one of the biggest mistakes that I have seen amongst those who were born, I guess this is a good point to say, to make a point, a good time for me to make a point. We conflate being born off the land with being born on the land. And in the interaction between, in Buckingham Palace, what we were seeing was a classical example of someone who was born off the land and someone who was born on the land. But both parties not recognizing that subtle difference. And one person taking it out of context without realizing that the use of the word, in the last 2 decades, a lot of the words we use have been changed. If you speak to someone who is from the silent generation, they regard nationality very differently to what we who are, and I don't put myself in that category, but those who are millennials and Generation Z consider as nationality. Very different. For the people who are silent generation or baby boomer generation, they consider that to be not where you were born, but where your people are from. In other words, your lineage. In present society or present day society, we've changed the rules of the game. So nationality is now based on the document you have, which says your nationality is where you were born. 2 separate concepts. They're not synonymous and they're not the same. So what we find is that there's this, on both sides, arrogance and ignorance, refusal to give each other grace, and therefore we're talking at each other rather than to each other. Now, let me stop and switch between systems and see if I've done everything right on a different platform, and if there are questions or interactions, I can let me see. Again, I apologize. I'm speaking on 2 different platforms, and I haven't been on Clubhouse for a while. Let me try and see if I can, before I conclude, see if there are any. Okay, I've got an invitation.